Today we have Dave Thompson, a former superintendent, with us to talk about his career path. Welcome, Dave.
Hello, thank you for having me on today.
Yes, thank you. Now, I know you were a previous superintendent. Can you tell us what you're doing now and how you got into that role?
Right now I'm doing some consulting with different kinds of schools. I'm also doing consulting with a construction management company where I build and design new schools. So do a little bit of work with MSBA, which is the Minnesota State School Boards Association. I do some teaching and classes and superintendent searches for those people as well.
Okay, so even though you're not an active educator, you're still taking an active role in education with buildings and superintendent searches.
Yes, it's fun. I always enjoyed education, so it's a little different, but it doesn't have the same kind of pressures that being a superintendent is, especially in this time of COVID.
Yes, and that's really why we wanted you on today as an educator. Can you tell us what a superintendent does and what pressures you're talking about?
Well, a superintendent does a lot of different things and never is a day the same. They're all different. In most cases, you know, we're trying to do planning for the school district, which involves a lot of communication, working with people inside the building and out, you know, working with students, working with staff, and also working with governmental agencies as well as local government officials and the city officials. And that's part of it, but there's also a lot to do with fiscal responsibility, you know, looking at that, trying to keep the school physically sound, as well as also to do that, you have to work with the legislators and tell them, you know, how things are happening and what things are doing. Another very important aspect of it is, you know, working with the stakeholders, the taxpayers of the community, so that they know that they're getting a good deal for the taxes that they're spending on the school district. So that's a lot of communication, a lot of planning, but a big piece of it is building positive relationships. That's very, very important, as the school is, most cases in a small school, like Stewartville, I guess it's probably mid-size, but you know, relationships are very, very, very important. And because, you know, you're working with people all the time, education is a people person business, and so you want to build those positive relationships with everybody in the community.
Wow, that is a lot.
Also times, I mean, you also got to do such things as, you know, order materials, sometimes run a referendum, then you have to use those kind of things. Also, you know, there's many other different things, you know, visiting the schools, sometimes be reading to students in the morning, sometimes speaking in a class, high school class. There's just a tremendous amount of things that you actually do. Plus you have all the staff development with the staff, with the teachers, professional development, plus all those things. Plus you're basically preparing for school board meetings and preparing the school board members so they're ready for their meetings, usually twice a month.
Okay. And you talked a little bit about skills that you would need. You mentioned communication, you mentioned budgeting with the fiscal responsibility. What other skills, because you just described a lot. So what other skills would an aspiring youth need to, if they want to be a superintendent, what they need to have and gain along the way?
Well, some technical skills, certainly working with a computer and the internet, you know, in this day and age, certainly all the different times of social communication that you have to do, you know, look into, whether it's, for example, when we were building a new school, I did a lot of things on Twitter, you know, so you have to get out that information on those kind of things. These days also with COVID, you have to do a lot of things with Zoom, for Zoom meetings, Google meetings, Google Team meetings, Outlook, Excel, all those kind of things. So, you know, the technical computer, those kind of things are very important. We talked some about finance, certainly the instructional skills, you know, because you were a teacher before and probably a principal or a curriculum director, you know, you're teaching all the time, basically, whether it's community members, whether it's board members, whether it's students, whether it's staff. So certainly instructional skills are important. And then again, we kind of touched on understanding, communicating with the educational policy, building that up with especially legislators and community organizations.
Yeah, a lot. And you mentioned you might start before a superintendent as a teacher or principal. Can you tell us your background, how you got into that superintendent role?
Sure. I started out as a science teacher and coach at Elgin Millville Public Schools. I was there for 7 years. And then from there, I went to Goodhue as principal for 2 years. I was at high school principal. Then I was at Stewartville for 7 years as high school principal. And then I went to Farmington for 7 years as middle school principal. And then they promoted me to director of secondary education, and then promoted me to assistant superintendent. And then the last 18 years, I was superintendent at Stewartville Public Schools. Along the way, I did do some teaching for St. Mary's University, as well as Winona State University as an adjunct professor teaching in the principal licensure program and doctorate program.
So that even though you're superintendent, you're still having that ability to have your hands in teaching and education.
Yes. And the thing about that, you know, even though I was the professor, I learned every time, every class I taught, I learned from the people in the class. So that was really, really important.
Yeah, you've had definitely a variety of jobs and different populations. I guess you mentioned earlier that Stewartville is mid-size. Could you tell us the difference between being a superintendent of a smaller versus a mid-size or a larger school district? What the difference might be?
Well, I think one of the differences as you start in a smaller school districts, you wear a tremendous number of hats. You know, so you don't have a curriculum director, and sometimes you're the principal and superintendent, and sometimes, you know, there's other different kinds of job responsibilities that you may have as a superintendent in a smaller district. Stewartville district, we have a cabinet of about 13 people. And so obviously I don't have quite as many, although those 13 people would be I would supervise those. And probably in a larger district like Rochester, you even have more people that can do some of those kinds of responsibilities, whether it's, you know, teaching and learning or different kinds of facility, those kind of things. So you have more people that you'd be working with, but you have obviously a greater responsibility because you have many more students and staff.
Perfect. You mentioned teaching and getting licensure. Can you tell me, obviously as a science teacher, you would have a bachelor's. Did you have more than that? And are there other certifications as you're moving from the principal to superintendent role that you would need?
Yeah, in Minnesota, you'd start out with a bachelor's degree, and mine was in science. So I taught earth science, physical science, and physics. And then to go on from that, plus I had my coaching certification. But when you go from that in Minnesota, you have to have your master's, and you either have to have your 6th year or specialist degree. Okay, and then from that, I went on to Drake University and got my doctorate degree. You don't have to have a doctorate to be a superintendent in Minnesota, but that's certainly one thing that was a goal of mine, to get the doctorate, and that I think helps.
Very cool.
I just want to mention a little bit about that. I mean, that's all the formal education, but I think to be a really good superintendent, certainly is networking is extremely important, and networking with your other superintendents, and learn a lot of things from other people and share a lot of things is very, very important. I think that the networking is as important almost as the formal education.
I appreciate that because
The other part of that is being a lifelong learner. I really think that's a very, very important skill, because you just don't get the degrees and say, oh, I'm done. You know, you always got to keep learning. It's something that's very, very important all the way through the whole career. You have to be a lifelong learner so you can help other people learn as well. Because things change, as you know, as the kids know, you know, things are changing all the time. So to keep up with it, you have to keep learning as well.
that's exactly why we're doing videos like this, because education has changed with COVID. And so this is a way to reach those kids and still let them see experiences.
Right.
Would you be able to describe maybe the starting pay of a superintendent in a ballpark? I don't need any specific numbers, but if a student were to think of this as a career option, what kind of money would they be looking at for a first-year superintendent?
Well, again, first you have to be a teacher for at least 3 years.
Okay.
Most people are a teacher and then become some kind of administrator, either a principal, elementary, middle school, high school principal, or assistant principal, or a curriculum director, or director of finance, or something like that. And then you become a superintendent. I would say in the smaller districts, you probably start somewhere between 120,000 and 140,000, and then move up from those kinds of things. But again, everything depends on your administrative experience, your education, the size of your school, the location of your school, and some of those kind of things. There's a lot of things that go into determining the starting salary of any superintendent, or any salary of the superintendent, as it goes on and on.
Sure. And so kids might see that and think, this is a great career because I make over 100,000 coming out. But what kind of debt do you come out with your master's, because it's required, and then your other licensures along the way? Do you have any ballpark idea what that might be? What kind of debt a new teacher or principal might carry?
Well, you'd have to, do your first 3 years of teaching. So it depends on how much debt you still have left from that.
Yeah.
The statistics say that the average, the average student coming out is going to have between $30,000 and $60,000 probably debt. And so it depends on, did you pay off the first debt? Did you pay off your, teacher and BS debt first? If you have, then you can start from zero. And I think most people are doing, when your teachers probably are working some in the summer. I know I did. I taught driver's education all the summer. So then I would teach my driver's education and then take some summer classes. So I tried to stay debt free, but probably in that debt, you're probably going to, look at 10 to 15,000 before you get your master's done, depending on, now, you can do a lot of online stuff. So you can, you don't have all the windshield time driving back and forth to an own state or wherever, and you don't use up that time. The other thing too is, how fast you do it. Well, it's going to, usually it takes people 2 years to do their master's, maybe 3, but now with online could be some. Then it depends on other life kinds of things. Are you married? Do you have kids? All those kind of things also enter into play. So you have to have be able to be a good budgeter as far as what that's going to look like in the future. But I think most people, once they get out of debt, they try to keep out of debt if they possibly can.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Like I said, sometimes students might hear that and think it's a great career, but not realize all the education and requirements that go with it.
Right.
What drove you to be a superintendent? I mean, you even went and got your doctorate, but what was your passion to go do that?
Well, first off, my family is all in education. My grandma was a teacher. My dad was a superintendent and principal and teacher. My mom was a teacher. My wife was a teacher. My sister's a teacher. My brother's an administrator. Her 2 brothers are teachers. And her dad was on the school board. So it's kind of, education's kind of been in our family, kind of in our blood. So the thing though was that I really love to be a teacher. I love to work with the young students. I love to coach and work with young adults. And so I got a lot of happiness out of being in education. So I thought, well, what could I do to make a difference? So then I kind of went to be a principal, got that, thought that was pretty interesting. And then to be a superintendent, I thought, what else could I do to make a difference and to be a leader? And so that was important to me, to be a positive leader in the school district and make a great difference for not only the students and the staff, but also the whole community.
Thank you. That was a really great description of why you did what you did. As we close here today, and looking at the 15, 16-year-olds that will be watching these videos, do you have any final words or advice for such youth that would want to go into education?
Well, I think a couple things. Certainly pursue your passion. If that's what you're passionate about, that's what you'll be excited to be doing as a teacher, do that. That's very, very important. I think another thing is always pursue excellence in everything you do. Another thing would be keep balanced. I think that's very, very important. Sometimes I know as I look back in my career, It's sometimes easy to get out of balance with because you want to have things happen and you want them to make things happen good, but you have to keep your balance of your family and your life and your interests. And I think also the last thing would be make sure you want to be a lifelong learner, because education is going to change certainly now very quickly with the COVID and the way we're doing things, the way we're educating students these days, and the way that they'll be educated in the future. Certainly you have to be a lifelong learner to be successful in education now and in the future.
Thank you. If a student wanted to reach out to you and you were open to that down the road as they watch these videos, would there be a preferred method of contacting you?
My email is da.thompson, THOMPSON @kw.k12.mn.us, or my cell phone is 507-250-5505. 507-250-5505.
Well, thank you so much, Dave. The kids are going to learn a lot from this.
Oh, thank you. It was fun.